The diner on Mercer Street wasn't the kind of place that made it into travel guides. It had cracked vinyl booths the color of old mustard, a jukebox that only worked if you kicked it twice on the left side, and a laminated menu so worn you could barely read the prices. But the coffee was honest, the portions were real, and on a Tuesday morning when the rain came sideways off the lake, it was exactly the kind of place a man like Owen Braddock needed. He slid into the corner booth at 7:14 a.m., same as always. His daughter Lucy was buckled into the booster seat across from him, already clutching the small stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere, the one missing an eye that Owen had promised to fix for 6 months. He hadn't fixed it, he kept meaning to. There were a lot of things he kept meaning to do. He set his keys on the table, a single keychain, no frills, just a bottle opener shaped like a wrench that Lucy had picked out at a gas station last summer, and he pulled off her jacket while she squirmed and protested the way she always did, even when it was cold. "I'm not cold," she announced. "You were shivering in the car. That was a different kind of cold." He didn't argue. She was 5. She had opinions about everything and energy for nothing except those opinions. He loved her in a way that still sometimes caught him off guard, like walking into a doorframe in the dark. The diner was half full. A couple of truckers at the counter, an older man reading a folded newspaper by the window, 2 women in scrubs sharing a plate of hash browns and laughing about something that made them both cover their mouths. The usual crowd. Owen knew their faces without knowing their names. That felt about right for his life lately. He picked up the menu even though he always ordered the same thing, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, because looking at it gave him something to do with his hands while Lucy arranged her rabbit on the seat beside her and explained to it, very seriously, what she planned to eat. "She's going to have the pancakes," Lucy told the rabbit, "but not the blueberry ones because those are gross." "You love blueberries," Owen said. "Rosie doesn't." He nodded. He had learned not to debate Rosie's preferences. The waitress who came to their table moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been on her feet since before sunrise. Her name tag read Simone. She had dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, and there was a small smudge of syrup on her left sleeve that she either hadn't noticed or had long stopped caring about. She smiled at Lucy first, that instinct people had around kids, and Lucy responded by lifting Rosie the rabbit so she could be seen. "Good morning," Simone said, and she meant it. Owen could always tell when service workers meant it. "Morning," he said. "She'll have the short stack, no blueberries. I'll do the usual." Simone paused. "I'm sorry, I don't think I've had you before. What's the usual?" "Oh," he felt a little foolish. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, perfect. She wrote it down, real pen on a real notepad, and Owen liked that. "Coffee now, please." She was back in under 2 minutes. Lucy was explaining something about her kindergarten class to Rosie, involving a boy named Tyson who had eaten glue and had not suffered any consequences, which Lucy found deeply unfair. Owen wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out at the rain. He had a 9 a.m. meeting with a contractor about the burst pipe in the basement. He had a parent-teacher conference at 3:30 that he'd already rescheduled twice. He had a voicemail from his mother that he hadn't listened to because he already knew what it said, in the general way that you know what a voicemail says before you play it. "You should eat more, you should sleep more. Have you thought about getting help with Lucy? Have you thought about—" He drank his coffee. The door opened with a gust of cold air and the sound of rain, and the 2 men who walked in were loud before they'd even crossed the threshold. Not aggressive loud, not yet. Just the loud of men who were accustomed to being the most important people in whatever room they entered. They wore coats that cost more than Owen's truck payment. One of them was on his phone. The other was scanning the diner the way people scan a room when they're deciding whether it's good enough for them, and the answer was clearly no. They took the booth directly next to Owen's. The one on his phone dropped into the seat without looking up. The other, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of haircut that required monthly maintenance, exhaled loudly as he sat like the act of sitting was an imposition. Owen didn't pay them much attention. Lucy had moved on from Tyson's glue incident to a broader philosophical argument about why kindergarten nap time was, in her assessment, unnecessary. "I'm not tired at nap time," she said. "You fall asleep at nap time. That's just my eyes resting." He was about to respond when he heard the voice from the next booth. Hey! He didn't look over. It wasn't directed at him. "Can we get some service over here? We've been sitting here for 4 minutes. Owen glanced at his watch. They'd been sitting there for 2. Simone came around the counter, coffee pot in hand. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I get started for you?" "Coffee," said the man on his phone, still not looking up. He said it the way you'd say it to no one in particular. The broad-shouldered man. Owen would later learn his name was Trent, though he introduced himself to no one. leaned back in the booth and looked at Simone with an expression that Owen recognized immediately. He'd seen it in conference rooms and on job sites and in the parking lots of places that didn't want to let you in. It was the look of a man deciding in real time how little this other person mattered. "You got a manager here?" Trent said. Simone kept her expression pleasant. "Is there a problem? We've been sitting here a while. I just want to know if there's someone running this place or if it's kind of a free-for-all." "I'm happy to take your order right now," Simone said. "I'll have the eggs Benedict, and tell whoever's back there that I want the hollandaise on the side, not on top. Last time I was here," he paused. "Actually, I've never been here before, doesn't matter. Hollandaise on the side, of course, and I need the coffee hot. Last place we stopped, the coffee was barely warm." He looked at the mug in front of him as if it had already disappointed him. "I don't know why that's a hard thing. I just brewed a fresh pot," Simone said. "You're all set." She turned to the man on the phone who still hadn't looked up. He held up one finger one moment and kept talking. Simone stood there. Owen watched her face. She didn't let anything through. She had a look he recognized too, the look of someone who had learned through repeated necessity to put a pane of glass between themselves and whatever was being said to them. His eggs arrived. He ate. Lucy worked through her pancakes with the systematic focus of a tiny civil engineer. The rain tapped the windows. The truckers laughed at the counter, and for a few minutes it was fine. Then Trent's food came out. Owen heard it before he saw it, the shift in the booth's energy, the small sound Simone made when she set down the plate. "This has hollandaise on it," Trent said. "I'm so sorry, let me," I said on the side. I was very specific. He said it with a precise kind of patience that was its own form of cruelty. The patience of someone who wasn't angry, just disappointed, because being angry might suggest the other person was worth being angry at. "I apologize. I'll have them remake it right away. How hard is that?" He looked over at his companion, who had finally put his phone down and was watching with the mild interest of someone watching a show they'd seen before. "You write it down. They make it. It's not a complicated transaction." Simone took the plate back. She didn't respond. Owen watched her walk toward the kitchen, and he watched the way her shoulders moved, the way she held them just slightly higher than they should have been, the small, controlled breath she took before she pushed open the kitchen door. He looked at Lucy. She was watching too, her fork still in her hand. She looked at her father with an expression that was too old for her face. "That man was mean," she said, quietly enough that only Owen could hear. "Yes," he said. "He was." She went back to her pancakes. She didn't ask anything else about it. And something about that. Something about the fact that she'd already absorbed enough of the world to know that sometimes men were mean to people who were just doing their jobs, and that the right response was to note it and move on. Something about that sat in Owen's chest like a stone. He looked over at the booth. Trent was now explaining something to his companion with the air of a man delivering a lecture he'd given many times before. His companion was nodding with the practiced nod of someone who had learned that nodding was easier than engaging. Owen wasn't an impulsive man. He'd spent most of his adult life learning not to be. He'd grown up with a father who led with his fists and his volume, and he'd spent 38 years becoming the opposite of that, which meant he thought before he spoke, he breathed before he reacted. He asked himself, every time, whether what he was about to do was coming from the right place. He asked himself that now. The answer was, yes. He turned in the booth so he was facing the two men. Not standing, just turned, calm. "She wrote it down correctly," Owen said. Both men looked at him. Trent's expression went through several small changes before settling on something dismissive. "Excuse me?" "The hollandaise. She wrote it down correctly. I was sitting right here. I heard her repeat it back to you. That's a kitchen mistake, not hers." Trent looked at him for a moment, this man in a flannel shirt with a 5-year-old across from him and a coffee mug that had a small chip on the rim, and his expression said everything. It said, "Who are you supposed to be?" "I appreciate your input," Trent said in a tone that meant the exact opposite. "I'm not finished," Owen said. Trent's companion went very still. "She's been nothing but polite to you since you sat down," Owen continued. "You timed how long you'd been waiting. You talked over her while she stood there. And now you're treating a kitchen mistake like she did it on purpose to ruin your morning." He paused. "She didn't. Nobody here is trying to ruin your morning. They're just trying to do their jobs." Trent leaned forward. Up close, he had the particular confidence of a man who was used to rooms tilting his way when he spoke. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but I didn't come here for a lecture from a guy sitting in a corner booth." "No," Owen agreed. "You came here for eggs Benedict, and you're going to get it. I'm just saying there's a way to handle a mistake that doesn't involve making someone feel small." "You're telling me how to handle a mistake." "I'm telling you how to talk to a person." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It had edges. Trent's companion was looking at something on the table. The trucker at the counter had his coffee mug halfway to his mouth and had stopped moving. Even the jukebox seemed to be holding its breath. Lucy looked at her father. Her rabbit sat forgotten beside her plate. Trent smiled then, not a warm smile, but the smile of a man who had decided to be generous in a way that didn't cost him anything. "That's sweet," he said. "Really, very noble." He glanced at Lucy. "Good role model you've got there, kid." His eyes went back to Owen. "I suggest you mind your own business and finish your breakfast." Owen nodded once. "Sure." He turned back to his own booth. That was it. No more was said. Lucy watched him for a moment. Then she picked up her fork again. "Good," she said, just to him. One word, like a punctuation mark. Simone came back out with a remade plate. She set it down in front of Trent without a word. She was professional. She was precise. And then she moved past his booth. She caught Owen's eye for just a moment, brief as a camera shutter, and she gave him the smallest nod he had ever seen. Barely a movement. Just enough. He nodded back. He had no idea what he had just walked into. He had no idea that Simone, this woman with syrup on her sleeve and a notepad in her apron pocket, was not who she appeared to be. Her full name was Simone Voss, but she went by a different name in a different world. In that world, her name was on the masthead of a hospitality company called Voss Group, which owned 11 restaurant chains across the southeastern United States, 4 boutique hotel properties, a regional food distribution company, and, as of 8 months ago, a controlling interest in the parent company that supplied equipment to roughly 60% of the commercial kitchens in 3 states. She was 36 years old. She had an MBA from Wharton and a reputation in her industry for 2 things: a ruthless eye for operational inefficiency and a genuine non-performative belief that the most important person in any hospitality business was the one taking the customer's order. That belief had gotten her into trouble in boardrooms. It had also made her very, very successful. She had started doing this 3 years ago, working shifts in her own restaurants unannounced under a different name, wearing the same uniform as everyone else. Because she had read too many reports and not enough people. Reports told you what was happening. Working the floor told you why. It told you which managers were creating the pressure that led to mistakes. It told you which customers were the problem and which ones were worth building a loyalty program around. It told you which employees were carrying the whole operation on their backs while being paid like they weren't. She had been at the Mercer Street Diner for 3 weeks. It wasn't one of hers, not yet. The owner, a man named Paul Drummond, had been approached by Voss Group twice in the past year with an acquisition offer. Both times he declined politely but firmly. He believed in the diner, believed in its regulars, believed in the particular institution of a place where the same people sat in the same booths and ordered the same things and didn't have to explain themselves. Simone respected that. She also thought the place was being undervalued, overstaffed in the wrong positions, and undersupported in a dozen quiet ways that would eventually cost Paul more than he knew. She had come to understand it from the inside. She had not expected to be standing in the middle of it when a man in a flannel shirt decided to say something. After the breakfast rush, after Trent and his companion had paid their bill, leaving a tip that was technically adequate and somehow still insulting, Simone sat in the back room on her break and stared at the wall. She had worked floor shifts in 7 of her own restaurants. She had been ignored, interrupted, called sweetheart, had orders thrown back at her, been told to smile more, been asked if she was sure she'd heard correctly. She had learned to absorb it. She had trained herself to absorb it because it was the only way to stay long enough to learn what she needed to learn. But today something had shifted, not because of what Trent had done. She'd had worse. She had stood across from men who made Trent look like a minor annoyance. It was the man in the corner booth. She had watched Owen Braddock. She had taken his credit card on day 1 of her shift. That was how she knew his name, from across the diner every morning for 3 weeks. He always came in at 7:14. He always sat in the same corner. He always ordered the same thing, and always looked like he was carrying something heavy that he wasn't going to put down and wasn't going to mention. He was patient with his daughter in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. Simone had 2 younger sisters, and she knew what effortless looked like, and this wasn't it. This was practiced, deliberate, chosen. He chose it, every morning, even on the mornings when you could see in his face that he hadn't slept. She didn't know what his story was. She had a habit of not asking. She had spent 3 years learning to observe without interacting because interaction changed what you were observing. But today, she thought about the way he had turned in his booth. Not stood up, not raised his voice. Just turned and spoken and held a line that most people would have let go of because it wasn't worth the trouble. She folded her break receipt into thirds and put it in her pocket and went back out to the floor. Owen was signing his check. Lucy had drawn something on a paper napkin with the crayons that Simone kept behind the counter for the kids who came in. It appeared to be a horse, or possibly a very large dog. "That's beautiful," Simone said, because she believed in being specific with compliments. "Is it a horse?" Lucy looked up. "It's my dad." Owen made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Almost. I see the resemblance," Simone said. He glanced up then. He had gray eyes, the kind that looked different in different light, and right now they looked tired, but also she noted this without quite knowing why. Kind, not nice. Kind. There was a difference. "Thanks," he said, and she understood he wasn't talking about the drawing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." She wanted to say something more and couldn't find the shape of it, so she just took his signed receipt and moved on to the next table. He left her a 40% tip on a $14 breakfast. She didn't see him again for 4 days. She thought about him 2 of those days, which she told herself was simply because he had disrupted her habit of not noticing people and not for any other reason. On the 5th day, he came back. Lucy wasn't with him. He sat in the corner booth alone, and he looked like a man who was trying very hard not to look like a man who was sitting alone. He had his phone face down on the table and a folder of papers in front of him that he wasn't reading. Simone brought his coffee without being asked. He looked up. "You remembered, corner booth every morning, black coffee." She paused. "You're solo today. Lucy's at her grandma's for the week." He picked up the mug, set it down, picked it up again. "It's weird, right? You spend all this time wishing for 10 minutes of quiet and then you get a whole week of it and you don't know what to do with your hands." She surprised herself by sitting down across from him. Not for long, she had tables, but she sat. "What's the folder?" she asked. He glanced at it. Contractor quote, "Burst pipe. It's the 3rd time in 2 years, this same pipe, and every time I patch it and every time it bursts again, and now he's telling me I need to replace the whole line." He shook his head. "It's the house I grew up in, my dad's house. I've been trying to keep it running, and sometimes I think it's trying to tell me to let it go." Simone looked at the folder. "What does the quote say?" He slid it across to her. She picked it up and read it. She wasn't a plumber, she wasn't a home repair expert. But she had spent a decade making decisions based on whether the numbers in front of her made sense, and these numbers did not. "This is high," she said. "I know. Have you gotten a second opinion?" "I've gotten the same opinion twice, both from the same contractor." She looked at him. He said, "I know." She pulled out her phone and opened her contacts and wrote down a name and number on the back of an order slip and slid it across the table. "This is my brother-in-law," she said. "He does this kind of work. He'll be honest with you." Owen looked at the slip of paper. He looked at her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, and stood up and went back to work. He called the number. His name was Marcus, and he was a licensed plumber who drove a truck that looked like it had opinions. And he came out to Owen's house 3 days later and spent 40 minutes under the foundation and came back up covered in grime and told Owen that the pipe needed replacing but not the whole line, just a section, and the cost would be roughly 1/3 of what the other contractor had quoted. Owen texted the number Simone had given him. "Your brother-in-law just saved me $2,000. She texted back, "He's actually my sister's husband, and I'm pretty sure he overcharges family, so this is probably accurate." He stared at his phone for a moment, then laughed. Actually laughed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed at a text message. He started coming to the diner more. Not just mornings. Sometimes lunch, when Lucy was at school, and he could sit without the booster seat and the rabbit and the running monologue about kindergarten justice. He and Simone had the kind of conversations that happened in installments. A few minutes here, a few there, the way you build a picture not all at once, but piece by piece. He learned that she was from Atlanta originally, that she took her coffee the same way he did, that she had a habit of folding receipts into thirds that she seemed unaware of, that she had very specific opinions about the difference between good coffee and adequate coffee, and that this diner, she said, was firmly in the adequate category, which she seemed to find both honest and charming. She didn't tell him what she did for a living, not because she was hiding it exactly, but because on the floor of this diner she was Simone. And Simone was who she actually was, the person she'd been before the company, before the boardrooms, before the profiles and industry publications that made her sound like a strategy document. She liked being Simone here. She liked the work of it. She also increasingly liked this corner booth. What she noticed about Owen, what she kept returning to when she thought about it in the back room during her break, was the specificity of his decency. It wasn't performed. It wasn't the decency of a man who wanted to be seen as decent. It was just the way he moved through the world, quietly, without expecting anything for it. He asked her questions and listened to the answers. He cleaned up after himself. He remembered what she'd told him last time and built on it. He was, she realized, a person who paid attention. In her experience, people who paid attention were rarer than people thought. She didn't know she was about to be found out. It happened on a Thursday. She was clearing the counter when the door opened and a man in a gray suit walked in, looked around the room, and walked directly to her with the specific energy of someone who had made a wrong turn but was too committed to admit it. "Simone," he said. She recognized him immediately. His name was Kevin Albrecht. He worked in business development for a commercial real estate firm that had been trying, for the better part of a year, to get in front of her to discuss a property portfolio that overlapped with 2 of Voss Group's hotel locations. She had declined 6 meetings. He had apparently run out of patience. "Kevin," she said, her voice flat. He looked around the diner, the cracked booths, the jukebox, the laminated menus, and his face arranged itself into something between confusion and pity. "What are you doing here?" he said, and then, more precisely as he took in the apron, "What are you doing here?" Owen was in his booth. She could see him in her peripheral vision. He had his coffee and he was reading something on his phone, but he wasn't not listening, she could tell. "I'm working," she said. "You're working." Kevin said it the way someone says a thing they are still processing. "You, Simone Voss, are working as a..." He stopped himself, or tried to. The attempt was not successful. "Is this some kind of social experiment? Can I help you with something, Kevin? I've been trying to get 15 minutes with you for 8 months. I know, you have my emails. I do. And you're..." He gestured at the diner again, at the apron, at the coffee pot in her hand. "Working," she said. The trucker at the counter had stopped eating. The couple in the scrubs were watching. Owen had put his phone face down on the table. Kevin lowered his voice, though not enough. "I have a proposal that's directly relevant to your Lake Charles property and the Baton Rouge deal. I'm talking about an 8-figure transaction window. I don't understand why you've been..." "Kevin," she set the coffee pot down. "This is not the right time or place for this conversation. You should have known that before you walked in here." "How was I supposed to know? Because I told your assistant that I wasn't available." "Multiple times." She said it without raising her voice. "When someone tells you they're not available, that's information. You use it to plan better, not to show up where they work." Kevin opened his mouth and then closed it. He looked at her in a way that was trying to recalibrate. "I apologize," he said eventually. "That was out of line." "Yes," she said. "It was." He left. She stood at the counter for a moment. The diner settled back into its ordinary sounds. She didn't look at the corner booth. She didn't have to. Owen was there when she finally did look over. He was looking at her, not with surprise, exactly. It was something more measured than that. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a picture when they realize the depth is different from what they thought. She walked over. "I was going to tell you," she said. It came out simpler than she'd planned. "You don't owe me any explanations," he said. "I know, but I wanted you to hear it from me anyway." She sat down across from him. "My name is Simone Voss. I run a company called Voss Group. We own restaurants, hotels, some distribution operations. I've been working a floor shift here for the past month to understand the business from the inside before we make an acquisition offer to the owner." She waited. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is the coffee actually adequate?" She looked at him. "I told you. It's not bad. It's just not what you'd serve. What I'd serve." He nodded. He looked at his coffee. "The eggs are good, though. The eggs are great," she said. "That's the cook. He's been here 22 years, and Paul has no idea how much of this place runs because of him." Owen was quiet again. Outside, the rain had started up again, the way it always seemed to in the late morning, coming and going like it was trying to make a decision. "Does this change things?" he said. He asked it plainly, without performance. "Change what things?" He looked at her. She understood what he was asking. She thought about the plumber's number on the back of an order slip. She thought about 3 weeks of corner booth installments. She thought about the fact that she had sat down across from him, had actually sat down without a good professional reason, just because he looked like he needed someone to sit down across from him. "No," she said, "it doesn't change things." He nodded once. "Good," he said. "Just that, one word." She got up and refilled his coffee. She brought it back and set it down and said, "For what it's worth, what you did that morning with that man, I've worked a lot of floors. Nobody does that." "Somebody should," Owen said. She thought about that for a long time. Paul Drummond accepted the acquisition offer 6 weeks later. The terms included a provision that Simone had added herself, the cook, whose name was Gerald, and who had in fact been there for 22 years, would receive an equity share and a formal recognition as head of kitchen operations, with a salary adjustment that reflected what he had actually been worth the entire time. Paul cried a little when he signed. Gerald didn't find out until the paperwork was finalized and Simone brought him the contract herself in the back of the kitchen, still in an apron, and handed it to him while he was cracking eggs into a bowl. He stood there for a long moment, reading it slowly. "You the new owner?" he said. "I am," she said. He handed the contract back to her. "The hollandaise comes out wrong sometimes," he said. "I want you to know that up front." "I know," she said. "We'll work on it." The diner on Mercer Street stayed the diner on Mercer Street. Same cracked vinyl booths, same jukebox, same laminated menus. Simone kept the name because the name was the point. Owen found out about the acquisition the way people in this town found out about most things. Someone at the counter mentioned it to someone else, and it moved through the room like a slow current. He was in the corner booth when he heard. He didn't say anything. He just looked up at Simone, who was behind the counter and had clearly been aware of him hearing and had been waiting to see what he'd do with it. He raised his coffee mug. She raised hers. That was all. Lucy came back from her grandmother's the following Monday, full of opinions about everything she'd eaten and seen and done. And she climbed into the corner booth and arranged Rosie the rabbit and announced that she would be having the pancakes, which she described in detail to Rosie and then to Owen, and then when Simone came over, directly to Simone as though they were old friends, which, in the particular way that 5-year-olds make friends, without any of the caution adults accumulate, they apparently were. "She remembers my order," Lucy told her father gravely, as Simone went to put it in. "I know," Owen said. "She's good at her job, she is." Lucy considered this, then nodded in the way she had of nodding when she had arrived at a conclusion and was filing it away. Owen looked out at Mercer Street. The rain had finally stopped. The sun was doing something hopeful with the puddles on the sidewalk, turning them into small flat mirrors. A woman walked by with a dog, a kid on a bike. The ordinary movement of an ordinary Tuesday in a town where, if you sat in the right corner booth and paid attention, you could see exactly how much was happening right in front of you. How much was always happening, in the space between one person's deciding to be decent and another person deciding to notice. He drank his coffee. It was, he thought, better than adequate.